That is a way of demonstrating the basic experience which underlies some of the major forms of Oriental philosophy. And actually this way of demonstrating it is taken from a kind of Chinese and Japanese Buddhism called Zen, which I'm going to be talking about quite a bit today, because Zen is one of the best examples of a philosophy, shall we call it, in which this experience is dominant. Zen, of course, is a Japanese word, and it's spelled Z-E-N. And that is the Japanese way of pronouncing the Chinese word Chan. And this in turn is the Chinese way of pronouncing an Indian Sanskrit word, dhyana. And dhyana refers to the kind of experience which has been represented in this circle. Another word for it would be a second Sanskrit term, shunya. And the nearest we can translate shunya in English is emptiness or void. And so we might say this is an experience of the void. Before trying to explain what this is, and you know the funny thing is it really can't be explained because it has to be felt, because it's a transformation of one's basic feeling, one's basic consciousness of life. But I should mention first that it is characteristic of Eastern philosophy to be based on experience rather than ideas. You see, philosophy in the Western world, especially as it's taught in our universities and academies, is mainly a matter of thinking. It's a matter of trying to arrive at certain clear, positive ideas about the nature of man, the nature of the universe, and so on and so forth. And also religion in the West is somewhat similar because religion is largely concerned with belief in certain ideas. In these basic forms of Eastern philosophy, on the other hand, such as Zen, which is a kind of Buddhism, or Taoism, the basic native philosophy of China, or in Vedanta, which is the central form of Indian philosophy, what is basic to them is not ideas, but a way of experiencing, a way of feeling. And this might be called, as it is here, the void, demonstrated by this circle. Because it is not a void which is just emptiness. This isn't the idea that there are people in the backward worlds of Asia who think that the universe is ultimately nothing at all. It is rather that the void represents complete spiritual freedom. Or you might say, if you don't like the word spiritual, complete psychological freedom. And therefore, I want to try, if I can, to communicate to you, to give you some idea of what this experience is. In Japanese, in Zen, it is called satori. I'll write that down, it's an unfamiliar word. S-A-T-O-R-I. And I like the way that that's pronounced in Southern Chinese. They pronounce it because it's something that happens to you suddenly. Now let me try, if I can possibly, to put into some sort of words what this experience is. This experience, which so far as they are concerned, is the objective of human life. To get this is to understand the meaning of human nature and destiny. Only because it's a transformation of consciousness, because it's something you feel rather than something you think, it is for this reason difficult to put into words. But it is as if you saw quite suddenly, and indeed this experience could have happened to you. It can come without warning to anybody, and so what I'm going to be saying may strike a familiar ring in some ears. But it is as if quite suddenly you became totally convinced that the way everything is in this universe and at this moment is absolutely right. And that's almost putting it too weakly. I'm not trying to talk about a sort of Pollyanna feeling where we say, well, this is the best of all possible worlds, and everything, however evil and however wrong, is going to work out all right in the end because it's a means to an end in some master design. I'm not saying that. I'm saying it is suddenly feeling that everything is right the way it is now, however appalling, however terrible. And you know it beyond a shadow of doubt. There are two other aspects to this experience as well. And although you feel them all together, we have to talk about them separately. While the first aspect is feeling that everything just as it is so right that you could say of it, this is why I'm alive. This is what life's all about. The second is that everything you see and feel seems to come to life in an extraordinary way. You feel the world as you've seen it before was seen almost in a dream. But it is as if just the ordinary things that were confronting you suddenly went, yeah, and came alive. And the third aspect of it is that you no longer feel yourself and what you are experiencing to be separated. Although you don't lose the feeling of the outline of your skin, you don't forget that I, or Joe Dokes, is a possible name by which you can refer to yourself. Nevertheless, it suddenly seems to you that your skin is no longer what divides you from the world, it's what joins you to it. What you see outside you is also you. Now, we ordinarily restrict the idea of ego, of I-ness, or of you-ness to some sort of psychological entity or process inside us which is in control of things. And we identify ourselves with a sort of controlling center. But in this experience, it is as if that center were suddenly enlarged to include the whole universe. You almost feel as if you were God, except that in Eastern thought, one doesn't think of God as a kind of omnipotent person. I mean, there are lots of people in our asylums who say, well, I'm God. I always like the story of the woman who insisted that she was God, and to humor her, someone said, well, if you're God, will you please explain how you managed to create the universe in 6 days? She said, I never talk shop. It isn't feeling God in that sense, as if you could do anything. But it is feeling that you and this whole world are one. And that in this experience of oneness and the sudden coming alive of everything, and the profound rightness, that's the only word I can use, the profound rightness of each moment, of this moment, however far it may seem to be short of one's ideals of perfection. This is it. And you say, having seen this, I can die content. This is what it was all about. Now, you might think at the same time that an experience of this kind is rather dangerous. I mean, supposing one did become convinced that everything just as it is the ideal, is right. Would this mean that you could go out and murder some rich relative in order to inherit their fortune? Does it mean you can do anything you like? You can kick your father and mother, you can be cruel to your children, that you can steal and rob and anything? In a way, it does mean that. But that is only to say, isn't it, that we are free. And freedom is dangerous. But yet, freedom is one of the things which we cherish as one of our greatest possessions and privileges. But if we deny ourselves freedom, then we don't really have the power to act morally. because all true moral acts are not the acts we are bound to do. They are the acts we are free to do. But freedom is dangerous. The moment you teach a child to walk, you can teach it to kick its mother. The moment you teach a child to use a knife to cut up its steak with, the child can go and kill someone with a knife. Life is risky. Life is not safe. And so in the same way, this experience is not safe. But on the other hand, its content is so joyous that when people are profoundly happy, they are not in the mood, usually, to go out and slug someone. And so you might say, this experience then, which is the foundation of these great forms of Oriental philosophy, that sounds wonderful, and I'd like to get it. You know, that reminds me of a story. Once a fellow was traveling in England, and he'd lost his way and wanted to get to a certain village. And he went to a country yokel and said, can you tell me the way to Little Tuddenham? And the yokel scratched his head and said, well, sir, I do know where that is, but if I were you, I wouldn't start from here. And so in the same way, when one asks, how do I get this experience? That's not quite the right question. And to go out to get it is from the first the wrong approach. Because this sort of transformation of consciousness happens to a person only in the moment when you might say they give up grasping, they start to treat life not as something to be grabbed, when their whole approach to things is no longer clutching. You know, it was a basic teaching in Buddhism that the root of all human suffering is clinging or grasping. Just in the same way as I was suggesting on a previous program, that you can't cling to your breath without losing it. You have to let go of your breath. And for that reason, the word that is used in Buddhism for this experience, it's another word, familiar to you all, nirvana, literally means blow out. Whew. Don't hang on. Don't clutch life. And so one of the great problems is how on earth to get ourselves to give up clutching, to give up clinging. But you see, if that's something you eagerly want to do because you want to get something good out of it, this is still a grasping attitude. Well, you know, in Zen, they have a means of teaching people how to stop clinging. Zen, incidentally, is supposed to have been brought from India to China around somewhere between 400 and 500 AD by a fierce-looking gentleman called Bodhidharma. You can see him in this picture by the Japanese painter Soga Jasuku. He's always drawn as a very fierce fellow with a twinkle in his eye at the same time.